One, go.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Liverpool Politics Hour. We are your UK show every Thursday from 5 p.m. till 6 p.m. We know we're a little bit late this week. That's because we've decided to switch up the format. Hello and welcome to another edition of Liverpool. And as you might be able to tell, because of the format change, we are having a few technical difficulties. So if they do occur throughout the show, then please do bear with us. We should have all of these ironed out by over the next few weeks. So we've got a very exciting show for you tonight. I'm your host for this week, Fergus Turtle, and with me are Lindsay, Sam, and Tom, as always. And we'll be discussing the role of policing in the UK in the wake of the murder of Sarah Everard and the passage through its first reading of the Policing and Crimes Bill. We'll also be taking a look at the Labour Party and how well they are doing currently in polling and where they're which political direction they're going in to try and win the next general election. And we'll also be discussing mental health, particularly on campuses among students who have had a pretty hard time during this pandemic. But first, though, we've got the news takes from the weeks. So each of our presenters has brought a little segment, a little slice of UK politics news for us to bite into. So, Tom, what have you got for us?
So this week I went with the new briefing room that we're seeing in Downing Street that's been quite big in the news. So essentially what's happened is there has been money put towards a brand new briefing room for Downing Street, which has basically seen seating area for media and essentially just kitted it out for the low price of £2.6 million. Now, obviously, that's raised some huge questions, especially in a time where people are already questioning much of the government's funding in terms of other areas. But I suppose at least there are Union flags in this new briefing room. So maybe it makes it all worth it.
Thank you very much, Tom. Yeah, that's going to be very interesting. Lindsay?
So some good news from the European Medicines Agency, who have said that the AstraZeneca vaccine is safe and effective, and the benefits outweigh any risks. The chief, Emma Cook, has said that the committee has ruled that this is a safe and effective vaccine and the benefits outweigh any possible risks. The jab is not associated with an increase in the overall risk of thromboembolic events or blood clots. She's also added to that as well. So some good news.
Yeah, that's very interesting to hear. I hear there is still some supply problems, and we might be getting a bit of a dip of the supply shipments in April.
Don't take my segment. That's my segment.
Something we're all going to have to keep an eye on. Sam?
Hello. First of all, I'd like to say, vis-a-vis technical difficulties, Times Radio went down for an entire half hour. So, you know, we are not the only players in the in that arena. Anyway, as for my takeaway for the news, of course, we were all expecting potential supply drops in the UK. We didn't know when that would come, but when I spoke to David Salisbury a couple months ago now, he predicted that there would be issues, and it looks like there are. So the supplies we were meant to receive from India are, shock and horror, going to be used for Indians instead of being shipped back to the UK. And so that is going to cut our supply by approximately 5 million doses. And it means that at the minute, vaccination centres will stop taking bookings from the 29th of March for the entire month of April. So I think the idea is to stop the first dose program with a limited second dose approach. And that is going to impact, obviously, the vaccines of those younger than 50, but at least we have vaccinated the top 9, I think, priority groups that were to be vaccinated. So all in all, it's not bad news, and it could be worse. We could be the EU.
But could clearly looks like it's going to have some sort of effect on the opening up process. So there we are. We'll have to keep an eye on that one, and I'm sure we'll bring you lots of news to do with that over the coming weeks. So probably the biggest news story this week in UK politics was, of course, the murder of Sarah Everard, and the reaction to that event, and the candle-lit vigil that was held in London. Now, there was a lot of controversy over that, especially to do with how the police reacted to that vigil taking place. Lindsay has got a report for us.
Last Saturday night, there was a vigil held for Sarah Everard, the woman who was murdered in Clapham while she was walking home by a police officer. Despite being told to stay at home and follow COVID guidelines, there was still a large gathering of people that had come to pay their respects at Clapham Common on Saturday evening. Around 6 p.m, police started to move in, and the scenes quickly turned into aggressive conflicts between police and mourners. Many have criticised the actions of the police, who arrested and used force on many women who are peacefully mourning, and have called for Commissioner Cressida Dick to resign. Patsy Stevenson was one of the women arrested at the vigil and gained increased attention across social media after an image of her arrest went viral. Here is what she had to say to Good Morning Britain about her arrest.
And what exactly were you doing when you were arrested?
I was standing against a gate. So basically the police came onto the bandstand with us. And at first I wasn't on the bandstand, but someone said to come on because women were being aggressively spoken to, and we wanted to make sure everyone was safe. So some people moved flowers out of the way to make sure that they weren't trampled on. And we went onto the bandstand, and then all of a sudden there was a lot of police on the bandstand. Because of the amount of police, we were sort of forced towards a barrier. And at one point, I saw the woman next to me. There was a police sort of put his arm around her throat and was trying to pull her backwards. So we were very scared about what was going to happen. There was someone in front of me telling me not to give them my name or anything. So I've never been in a situation like this before. So I just thought, well, if I just don't say anything, I'm not sure what to do. But I just stood there, and I know a police officer was pulling my arm trying to get my name. And then all of a sudden I was tackled to the ground. So I was being taken away. Behind me, one of the police officers that was holding on to me, I believe it was him, was saying, I've got my hand on my baton to one of the other officers. And I thought, this is so terrifying, because we're about to walk into a crowd of people, and I don't know whether that crowd are gonna go against what's going on and me being arrested. I had no idea. So I was worried for the safety of others. And I did say to the crowd, he said he's got his hand on his baton, just be careful. And then they said, she's antagonising the crowd, please move her back. I wasn't trying to antagonise anyone, I was just making sure everyone was safe.
Many women have since said that the events on Saturday have only proven further how unsafe women feel on the streets, and especially around police officers.
Similar age to us, lived in the same area to us, and all she was doing was walking home. She had every right to be able to walk home safely. She did everything right. She wore high-vis clothing. She walked along the main streets. She rang her boyfriend.
Do you feel safe to walk down the streets?
No. Absolutely not.
No?
No. Absolutely not.
And I personally use keys in my hands. I know that loads of women do the same thing. I don't know about you two, but
my sister, as a present, I was gifted rape alarms. Because
rape alarms.
Men have to change. Men have to take action, and men have to rethink the way that they're behaving and interacting on the streets everywhere.
Nevertheless, Commissioner Cressida Dick and Deputy Commissioner Sir Stephen House have both defended the actions of the Met Police.
None of us would have wanted to see the scenes we saw at the end of yesterday's events. Worth saying, of course, I fully understand the strength of feeling, I think, as a woman, and hearing from people about their experiences in the past and what they feel about what happened to Sarah and what has been going on. I understand why so many people wanted to come and pay their respects and kind of make a statement about this. Indeed, if it had been lawful, I'd have been there. I'd have been at a vigil.
I understand that their actions have upset people, and we see the evidence of that on a daily basis, and we don't underestimate the upset that has been caused.
Okay.
But the officers took their actions believing they were doing the right thing to protect people's health. They were following legislation put in place by Parliament to protect the public in the middle of a health crisis.
Sir, I'll sort of interrupt you.
And that health crisis has not yet gone away. So I can't apologise for my officers. I'm sorry, of course, that people are so upset at seeing officers enforcing legislation. But the officers were doing their duty as they saw it, and I will not second guess that at this moment in time.
Wow, some pretty shocking scenes there throughout the week. Lindsay, what was your main takeaway from putting that report together?
Well, obviously, the murder of Sarah Everard was incredibly upsetting for myself as a woman and for every other woman across the country, because I think everybody saw a bit of themselves in Sarah. Like the woman said in the clip, she was doing everything right. She was being incredibly safe walking home. Like, that could have been any woman in that position. And I think it's important that the Met Police listen to women now and take on board what they've said. Of course, it was a Met Police officer that was found, that has been allegedly guilty of the murder. So obviously now I think the Met Police need to listen to women and what they feel is behaviour that would make them feel safer on the streets. And I think the scenes that we saw on Saturday night were distressing, to say the least. And I think going forward, there needs to be some serious conversations had about women's safety.
Do you think there's much evidence that that's really being taken on board?
I mean, not yet. I think that what we heard in the clip from the Deputy Police Commissioner there, that he said that he didn't want to be, he apologised that people were upset because the police were following the rules, isn't really a sufficient apology, considering the situation. I understand that they are following orders and that they have to protect the safety of individuals firsthand, but in the situation that was so sensitive to this particular case involving the police and women, I think that there could have been a little bit more hindsight in how they treated them. And I just think there has been no apology from that. Is just showing that we're not moving forward in the way that we want to.
If I can come in just very quickly, that I agree with everything Lindsay's saying, and I think the Met Police have been having a lot of issues with policing fairly and equally across all protests. Of course, you had the BLM protest that happened back in the summer, and the Met Police were accused of picking and choosing which protests to enforce during coronavirus legislation. And so I think they tried to make a judgment call, but it was completely the wrong call, because they decided, well, this time we've got to take morality out of it, and we've got to police this according to the letter of the law. And that's what they did at the vigil, and it was totally the wrong response. But you can see where what the Met Police were trying to do, which is apply a blanket rule for all protests. But unfortunately, it was completely the wrong decision.
Lindsay, thank you very much. Now, related to that story, this week there was also the introduction of the new crime and policing bill. Now, this bill does a number of things, including adjusting some sentences, but some of the major issues in it are around protests and judging when a protest becomes illegal and what penalties might apply in those circumstances. Tom has prepared a report for us, so we'll bring that for you now.
On Wednesday the 16th of March, the government's Police, Crime and Sentencing Bill passed its second reading in the Commons with a majority of 96 votes. The proposed changes to legislation within the bill have sparked much criticism. However, the area of legislation which seems to be most polarising is that of the policing of protests. Why were these changes to legislation deemed as necessary in the first place? I spoke to Matt Parr of Her Majesty's Inspectorate of the Constabulary for more information on this. Joining me now is Matt Parr, who is Her Majesty's Inspector of the Constabulary for the London and National Regions. Matt, thank you for your time today.
Hi Tom, nice to see you.
You led a recent report which looked at the policing of protests and how effectively the police use their powers when it comes to dealing with protests. So I suppose, first of all, what called for the need for this report and led to the Home Secretary commissioning you to inspect how police protest in the first place?
I think it went back a couple of years, actually. I think there were a series of protests in London and other places which were felt to have sort of raised public concern about whether police were getting the balance right. And there was as you may know, there was a police and crime bill going through Parliament. And there were some specific protests, proposals around protests that the Home Secretary wanted a sort of independent view on before that went through Parliament. So that was the background to it.
In this report, you reference different issues with recent policing of protests, and you also provided recommendations for how to solve them. Obviously, there's been a lot of discussion about the recent police crime sentencing and courts bill. In this bill, do you see a lot of the proposals coinciding with the recommendations you called to be made?
We were asked to look at 5 particularly, and we gave cautious support for all of them. Our ultimate aim as an inspectorate is to improve the effectiveness and efficiency of policing, and it was our view that all 5 that we were asked to comment on had the potential to make policing more efficient. We were nervous about all of them a little bit, and quite a lot about the 5th one, which was stop and search. And what we said, stop and search at protests. And what we said is that because of all the other things that people get concerned about with stop and search, that one would have to be really, really carefully looked at. In the end, that one's not in the bill. The one that we were most nervous about didn't go in the bill, but the other 4 did, with some others that we weren't asked to comment on and we haven't looked at. So, for example, the ones about noise that you might have seen, we weren't asked to comment on those and didn't, in fact.
Would you have any particular comment on those for me at the moment?
The one thing I wanted to get over and emphasise to anyone we talk about this is that we completely recognise the kind of moral and legal right that people have to do protests. We also recognise that protests will cause disruption. I don't think anyone has got any idea that you can have that the end game, if you like, is zero disruption. Nobody thinks that. I think it's really just about balance. And of course, the human rights that are so clear to protest are not unlimited. They have to be balanced against other people's rights and residents' rights to go about their business and businesses' rights to carry on trading. So the police are always trying to strike this balance. And what I think we were saying in particular is that the more the police know about, for example, how much disruption is likely to be caused, and the more they've got good legal advice, the easier they'll find it to find the balance. And if they don't have those things, they can, for obvious reasons, they tend towards not imposing conditions when sometimes it would be perfectly reasonable for them to do so. And the last thing that's in our report is if you look at what the public mood is, and I'm maybe not the student population in Liverpool or anywhere else, but the public mood is less supportive of disruptive strikes and certainly unlawful strikes than some people realise. So it's not a kind of massive crackdown. It's absolutely not a ban on strikes or a ban on assemblies or anything, a ban on protests or assemblies. It's purely just we think there's a little bit of a nudge backwards to achieve a better balance. That was the main aim of our report. And
do you see that better balance being achieved with the proposals in the bill?
Oh, that's a matter for some. Well, I mean, I haven't really got an opinion on the ones we weren't allowed to comment on because we didn't inspect against it, and we didn't look for any evidence of how it would work. I think the ones that we had that we recommended, I think that would achieve a better balance. Let me give you an example. At the moment, the police can apply for conditions and impose conditions on marches. but they can't impose the same conditions on assemblies. And the reasons aren't logical. They just go back to kind of Victorian law and how we got here. And, you know, there's some ancient bylaws and around London, all sorts of complicated legal background. And it seemed to us that there was no logical reason for not treating protests and assemblies in the same way. You know, so that was one of them. There's a loophole in the law at the moment where, and protest groups, you know, quite understandably, because it's there, that they use this, which is you can't be penalised if you refuse to cooperate with conditions that have been quite legally imposed on a protest. You can't be prosecuted if you can say, well, we just didn't know about them. The proposal is that you change the law so that if you might reasonably be expected to know about them, then you could, and that prevents protesters, you know, literally putting their hands over the ears when the police are announcing the conditions, and then using that as a defence in court. So I don't think these are unreasonable proposals, and our advice was very clear, and we took a lot of legal advice on this. They're completely compatible with human rights law as it stands, and it absolutely, in our view, would not act as a sort of chilling effect on the right to protest at all, because that's not what anybody's got as an intention.
So do you think some of the maybe outcry that we've seen in the media and so on about, we've seen the word draconian tossed around quite a lot, do you think that's quite unwarranted?
I think it's gone too far. Yeah, I think you would. It's one of those issues, frankly, Tom, that polarizes opinion. You know, if you talk to as we did, if you talk to the lawyers and the leaders of some of the protest groups, you know, they're very strident about the opinions that they have. If you talk to some business leaders and some people who've been heavily disrupted by protest, they've got equally polarized views. No one's ever going to be satisfied by where the balance is struck, but the point remains that it's the responsibility of police forces and lawmakers, and actually the courts at the end of the day, to determine what the right balance is. So I think it's a situation that any proposal that's made is always going to be controversial, because people have got quite strong opinions at either end of the spectrum.
After my discussion with Matt Parr, I was lucky enough to be joined by Adam Wagner, who's a human rights barrister, and we spoke further on the bill together. Before this interview, I had a discussion with Matt Parr, who is Her Majesty's Inspector of the Constabulary for the London and National Regions, and he stressed the importance of finding a balance between the rights of protesters and the rights of others, such as businesses, when policing protests. So how important do you think this balance is when it comes to the policing of protests?
I agree that, as with anything involving the right to protest, there has to be a balance of competing interests, and human rights law definitely accepts, it's premised on the fact that there is a balance to it be achieved. I think that the current law achieves that balance. I mean, arguably pushes quite hard on the side of, businesses and individuals who are affected by protests rather than protests. Because if the police think there's going to be serious disruption to the community through a protest, they can direct it not to happen or to go somewhere else.
Now, do you think the recent police crime sentencing and courts bill ultimately pushes us further away from striking this balance?
I mean, undoubtedly, because it opens the door for police to put directions on any protest, regardless of the effect, because it's basically any really noisy protest is suddenly the test for whether the police can impose conditions. So every protest is really noisy, and I think it's so wide and it's so subjective that it will allow the police to prevent whatever protest they want. And I think that doesn't achieve a balance, because what ends up happening is it's the unpopular protests that end up getting stopped. And I guess that undermines the whole point of protest. Protest is about getting people's attention. It's about putting across a point of view which can't be expressed adequately in other forums, whether it's Parliament or on social media or other places. There's nothing like getting a bunch of people together to express themselves publicly together. And that's, it is annoying and it can be disruptive. But as there was a famous case about protesters, the judge said that protests are unruly things, and you've got to accept a certain amount of that as the price of democracy.
Now, on a similar note to you mentioning there that a lot of this is a lot of how much disruption happens is really going to be up to the discretion of police. On a similar note, under this bill, it will one of the provisions is to give the Home Secretary power through secondary legislation to define and give examples of what serious disruption actually is. So how, I suppose, risky do you think this is, giving so much power to the Home Secretary on this issue?
Well, it depends for people listening. I mean, how, if you think of an issue that you care about, just pick the issue you most care about, and you want to, and imagine that something happens involving that issue that you want to go out and, take to the streets about. Do you want the Home Secretary being able to decide whether your idea is a good idea or not a good idea, or, an idea worthy of a protest? And I think most people would say, actually, the Home Secretary should be kept out unless there's some risk of violence or a really, major disruption to public life. Because otherwise, where would we be without protest movements, without the civil rights movement, without the suffragettes, without the environmental rights movement? Why else nothing has brought more attention to environmental issues than environmental protest. Pretty annoying for a lot of people, and it's pretty important for the future of the world. So you got to achieve that balance. I really doubt the Home Secretary, whose job it is not to worry about those issues, but to deal with to deal with police. I just don't think the Home Secretary should have that power.
Thank you very much for that report, Tom. Now, it's been a tough couple of weeks for the Labour Party, who seem to slip further behind in the opinion polls in the wake of the successful vaccine rollout. I prepared this report where I asked what is going on with the Labour Party right now.
Susan Elizabeth Jungwirth, Labour and Cooperative Party, 16,728. Ian Levy, the Conservative Party candidate, 17,000.
12th of December 2019, a disastrous night that will be painfully etched into the memories of Labour activists for many years to come. Since then, the party has a new leader, a different line on Europe, economic policy, and so-called culture war social issues. It hopes to once again curry favour with voters in its former industrial strongholds, like the Red Wall, where they infamously lost so much ground. Then there's the small matter of the global pandemic, a crisis of epic proportions, met with what the government now admits was a response that was too little, too late. Britain has been left with one of the highest death tolls in the world. All of this, combined with no shortage of the sort of government scandals, mistakes and embarrassments that usually lead an opposition to become popular mid-term, might lead us to expect Labour to be in a very competitive position, and yet it looks like they are falling far short. While the party did close the gap in the polls in the wake of Dominic Cummings' trip to Barnard Castle last year, some recent polls have put Labour back almost as far behind as they were those 14 long months ago. It is true that the government has benefited from the fast-paced vaccine rollout, but Sir Keir Starmer's personal ratings have also seen a slide. A number of bids at relaunching Starmer's leadership have failed to show any serious signs of success. So, where is it all going wrong for Labour? And how can they turn things around and win the next election?
I think it's a really good it's a really good question, and I don't think there's just one answer to that question. I think we're looking at a legacy of 10 years of not being in government. I think we're also looking at a legacy of Boris Johnson, because he's only been in power for a little under 2 years now, 18 months.
Elena Danderson is a young Labour activist and Liverpool politics student. She supports Keir Starmer's leadership.
He's got one of the biggest majorities that we've ever seen due to Brexit, and I think he's enjoying sort of support from that. But mainly and chiefly, it's the vaccine dose and it's the vaccine rollout. I don't think there's any getting away from the fact that he is enjoying almost a honeymoon period from that, because people are associating the vaccine rollout as a Johnson success. I think we need to. I think in Labour we need to show that the mistakes happened along the way were preventable, and over the next three and a bit years we need to really hammer it home that how the Tories handled the pandemic has directly impacted deaths and it's directly impacted people's lives. And he hasn't had that opportunity to really stab through to the public consciousness of showing what he really can do.
It's not just in opposing the Conservatives
and I think it's just,
where Starmer's problems lie.
It's unfortunate timing.
The leadership of his predecessor, Jeremy Corbyn, really transformed the party, causing a shift to the left within its membership.
He could be.
Many of those same members who were inspired by Corbyn now find themselves alienated as the leadership tries to distance itself from the policies and personnel who once dominated. Liam Ward is a student activist on the left of the party who voted for Starmer but now feels let down by his leadership.
I've never seen the Labour Party more fractured and factionalised than I do right now. I've seen a huge exodus of long-term members, even former councillors and representatives of the party I personally know have left due to Starmer's leadership. He either has changed his mind since getting into power, which I would say is rather unlikely, or lied to the left wing of the party to become elected in the first place.
When you've got a divided Labour Party, when you've got a Labour Party that is factional, that sees factions, and our factional fight is very public, we lose votes. There is a direct correlation there between, if we have internal battles, then the internal battles will look bad on the party, and consequently we lose votes. So I definitely think the unity of the party is essential in seeing us win the next election and doing well in all of the elections that are to come. Just give him an opportunity, give him a chance. We need to see what his leadership looks like. And he hasn't had that opportunity to really stab through to the public consciousness of showing what he really can do. And I think it's unfortunate timing. But I think that Starmer really has a good chance over the next 3 years to show just how brilliant he could be.
I put it to Liam that Starmer's leadership hadn't had the chance to get off the ground due to the circumstance of the pandemic, and the difficulty of opposing during a once-in-a-generation crisis.
It was a really bad time for a leadership election in retrospect. Starmer's been thrown in at the deep end in what is the biggest pandemic any of us have seen in 100 years. But I think Starmer's idea of constructive opposition has been an absolute failure. Rather than performing the function of an opposition party and holding the government to account, I feel as though Keir Starmer's Labour Party has been enabling some of the more negative aspects of the pandemic response. For example, lifting the second lockdown for Christmas, which, as we now know from the numbers, was a terrible idea.
And what about after lockdown? What do our activists make of the direction that Keir Starmer might take once this is all over?
I think the economic vision, and I think his vision generally, is going to be incredibly essential to us hopefully winning 2024. I think that it's very much trial and error. Like I say, he's very new to the job, and he has taken on a massive project since the last leadership. You know, they were in power for 5 years. They ran the party in a way that he wouldn't necessarily have himself, and he's finding his footing. And it's very much trial and error. I think the way to get it through to the public consciousness, as I say, is getting on the media, getting on TV, getting on the doorstep when it's safe to do so, and really showing, first of all, the failings of the Tories, and second of all, and most importantly, showing where Labour can do better.
Starmer recently has gone on a big patriotism drive, and there is nothing inherently wrong with being patriotic. I think it's a method which has had great success for the Conservative Party and Boris Johnson. However, when Keir Starmer comes out and speaks in front of a huge union flag, it comes across, especially to those on the centre and the left of the party and the wider electorate, as patronising and pandering. I think Starmer needs to develop his own identity rather than shadowing everything Boris Johnson does in a bid to be elected. I think there needs to be more of a perception of him wanting to listen to the people rather than making decisions on a whim or on advice of senior party members. And I think there's a wide sentiment at the moment in politics that a lot of politicians are only out for their own personal gain. I'm not going to speculate on whether that's true or not, but there is a wide-ranging perception that that is the case. And by showing more of an affinity for the general public, I believe that Starmer could present himself as a true alternative to the current government with a more decentralised approach.
Starmer's first electoral test is just round the corner in early May. The English locals, as well as mayoralty elections and a recently called by-election in Hartlepool, will probably provide the clearest indication of how the leadership is doing. I asked our guests what they thought a good night looked like for Labour.
It's very challenging to say in terms of the local elections, just because the turnout will be probably so low. And it's really just trying to get out the vote, ensure people know about it, and ensure people essentially get to the ballot box safely and securely. I honestly don't know what a good night for Labour would look like in the council elections. I don't think anyone knows what a good night will look like in a pandemic election. But it's going to be very interesting to see.
A bad night, I believe, for the Labour Party would see a diminishing of Labour in local government, in councils, as police commissioners, even possibly as mayors in some of the more swing elections, we'll call them. I think on a good day, we could see us maintain our current seats. I honestly, best case scenario, can't see a huge gain for Labour this May the 6th.
Will the Starmer era of the Labour Party go down as a success, or the latest in a long line of failures? Only time will tell. Welcome back, and we do once again apologise if there are technical difficulties along the way in today's episode. We are changing format, which is why you can't see our lovely faces this week. We are going audio only, and hence there may be a few bumps along the way. So please do bear with us, and we thank you very much for your patience. Now, it's been a long journey through this pandemic and the lockdowns that have accompanied it. Some of the people that have had the hardest time is students, and particularly with regards to mental health. In that regard, our correspondent Sam had a chat with someone about this issue.
Let's go with it. By the way, is your name, how do I pronounce your name? Is it Sylvester?
Sylvester. Yeah.
Sylvester.
So you just Sylvester. So you just treat the W as a V, let's say, so it's easier.
Okay.
So I posted that when I was on my way to work on the train in the morning, and I was like, that was when I got my feedback for thesis.
5 days ago, Sylvester wrote a LinkedIn post on his way to work. Sylvester had finally had enough. He was ready to admit to the world that he was struggling.
I am finally ready to say that this pandemic has affected me as a student, and I dare to say that I'm not the only one. I am as unmotivated, uninspired, and unproductive as never before.
For the listeners out there, where are you now and what are you studying?
So now I'm in Amsterdam at the University of Amsterdam doing my master's at Public International Law.
And so you wrote a LinkedIn post 3 days ago, which
that's right, yeah.
Which I picked up on, which was you admitting that the pandemic had affected you as a student. And I think the response to your post, were you expecting that big of a response? I think you got like nearly 3,700 likes on that.
Well, not at all, actually. So I posted that when I was on my way to work on the train in the morning, and I was like, that was when I got my feedback for thesis as well, and I was preparing for the exam, and I just talked to myself, like, I just genuinely was like, I'm not broken. I don't want to be really dramatic about this, but I felt like the stress and all the overwork of university, the load of information is kind of like having an impact on my mental health. Like, I'm quite positive as a person. I've always been really extrovert. I've always wanted to be in the middle of the attention, let's say. I wanted to talk to people. So pandemic was really, imagine a shy person being put on a stage. So imagine an extrovert being put in a room with no one else to talk to.
Yeah.
So I felt like my personality is some sort of derogating. So I just had enough of it, especially considering that the pandemic started last year and I was still in the UK and I hadn't had a ceremony for my undergraduates. No one said, good job, Sylvester.
Yeah, that was terrible. I mean, I had friends as well who were meant to graduate. They didn't get a graduation. I think it's the worst thing, to not be able to celebrate 3 cumulative years of hard work. But you speak of not wanting to be dramatic, but maybe this is the issue. Maybe it's we as students think we're being dramatic for expressing just a basic longing for support, and it's something. And I think it sort of plays out in your LinkedIn post. Maybe we're not actually being dramatic. Maybe we feel like we're being dramatic because we feel like that we are somehow, and I think this is how we're being treated, somehow a burden on the government, the state, or even the universities. And you say that have you been getting much support from your university in Amsterdam?
Right. So the thing about my university is we need to remember that I have a little of a perspective now. How is the university in the UK and how is the university in Europe? Well, I can say, obviously, we all know that the tuition fees are a little lower. I mean, much lower than the UK ones. But I think, right. So here we're getting an email every month asking us if we are doing okay, which I think is a little inappropriate when it comes to us, because as you pointed out, I thought I would be feeling a little, I thought I was dramatic, but the problem is that the expectation of a student from university, you have the expectation of your parents, university, companies, the professional environment expect something from you. So I don't think students would think first to complain about their mental health because we want to be the best. So what I struggle with when it comes to this questionnaires is no one wants to be the vulnerable one, the one that actually struggles, especially when you do law. You don't want to be seen as the one who can't comprehend the topic, who can't comprehend something, who is vulnerable when it comes to the lockdown. You know, we want to be the best we can be. You know, that's probably what our society expects of us. And I think that's one of the problems. So yeah, answering your question, the University of Amsterdam and then probably other universities in Europe provides us with email asking if we're doing okay. But that's where it finishes, really. I mean, university wasn't really vocal about what they provide. I know that there were some help, but I wasn't informed about them. Like, I didn't know it was out there. So I will tell you what happened. It is really sad, but 2 days after the post and then 2 days after it went crazy on LinkedIn, a person from University of Amsterdam committed suicide. It happened last week, I think. It was really sad. We all heard about this through Instagram. That's obviously an official website of university. You know, when you have all the gossip going on around the university, that's where we found out about this. And that really shook me as a person, especially after getting support from other people on LinkedIn. And I just found out that someone just killed himself because university wasn't reaching enough to people. And there's expectation from the society that we need to be the best of ourselves, especially when we can't do it anymore. This person taking away his own life because university wasn't proactive enough to act. And I think that's a problem. And obviously now I can tell you that university is doing something. I just got 2 emails with the exact detailed support I can receive from the university. I just got an invitation for online sessions. I got the invitation for yoga classes that I can participate with other people. So university have taken action. But what bothers
why does it take a death? Why does it take a death for university to start talking about yoga?
Exactly. So that's the problem is they've even started a platform of well-being of students. I think that was just some independent student idea to start a platform. I just said in the comments of that platform on Instagram with a hashtag too late. Like, I'm sorry, it already happened. And I understand you're taking the step now, you're stepping up, but you need to realize that it is too late for one person, and that person is not just one person, it can be any of us, and then you just decide to step up because someone just died. I mean, I just hope, I'm really glad that they've decided to take some actions, but I'm really upset that they've decided to take some actions, sent more emails just after the fact. And then what bothers me as well, that they haven't addressed it. They haven't said that someone committed suicide. I haven't gotten an email from university saying that this is what happened and we want to prevent that. A university openly hasn't said anything. And then I haven't received anything to my email saying one of the students within my university just, taking his own life.
Of course not. It's bad PR for the university.
Exactly.
Why would they? I mean, support born out of tragedy isn't really much support at all if it comes too late, especially for the student that passed away. And I also, in the UK, actually, at the University of Edinburgh, there was also a suicide student, but she was at home. She committed suicide when she was home, so she wasn't even away from her family. She'd committed suicide when her family was there and in her own home because of a lack of support. And personally as well, I'm on Twitter a lot, and I've seen and I've read posts from friends, people I know, saying that they had attempted suicide in the past. And I never knew this. These are people that I interacted with and interact with, when I can. And I was shocked because, my friends had attempted suicide at some point, and I know them, and it's something that society tries to keep at arm's reach to pretend it isn't actually prevalent. But then you realize, hang on, like nearly everyone will know people who are struggling, but it's kept under the radar. And I guess my next question to you is what has affected you the most? Which aspect of this pandemic has really got you struggling?
I think, to be honest with you, you've affected my entire person. You've affected my entire personality is based on the interaction with other people. And this has been taken away from me. Like, I understand we need to protect the vulnerable. We need to stay home to save lives. I think that's what the British government goes with. But after the pandemic, the vulnerability shifted. Now we vaccinating the oldest. They are I dare to say that they're no longer the vulnerable ones. Well, who is the vulnerable now? And the youngest, because our lives are starting, and then the impact of this pandemic, I'll be feeling for up to 10, 15 years. I'll be remembering that I've never said bye to my undergraduate friends. I've never even seen them after the pandemic started because I was just stuck home.
Me too.
And I'm doing my master's at the best university in Europe, and I barely even seen the school. I barely even see my teachers in person. The teachers that write articles online about all those issues about international, I've never really seen them. But you see, that bothers me. That bothers me that the universities are still closed. Like, I don't know how it's going in the UK now. If they're opening up pretty soon. I know that we might be opening up next month a little again. This crime scene path that you can't go anywhere else.
We have that here. I mean, at the University of Liverpool, first of all, they shut one of the libraries, so that was big controversy because they shut the humanities library, but they kept the science library open, and this was during exam season in January, right? And so when I went to the science library, you'd walk in, and I'd go into the room, and so there would be books on the wall in the library, but they were cordoned off like a crime scene. Just tape all around, crisscross tape around the books, because you're not allowed to touch the books in the library. You can't take them, you can't pick them. So I found that truly horrific, because it's taking away our ability to study in a way we're already not able to properly study, and I think many students have experienced more threats from their universities than they have support. For example, universities in the UK such as Cardiff, threatening to snitch on students who do the wrong thing. It's pretty terrible. Here in the UK too.
It is. Like, I don't really know how to what I would just say, open the door. I mean, we the vulnerable, we suffering, we are depressed, the students. I feel like we're being left behind.
Yeah.
We're being left behind by media. I know there are some people speaking up about the youth and the implication of the measures, but we're being left behind a lot. No one is mentioning those young people, because they would say, going socialize with your friends is not as important as people dying, because that's true. It's not as important as people dying, but we are struggling a lot with that. Yeah.
We're social creatures by nature.
So I dare to say that now it's a time to talk about the youth. Now is the time not to talk about, I know we still have to talk about people dying and suffering from coronavirus, but there's all the part of the population that also struggles, and we have to remember that the youth are going to be adults. They're going to be doctors, teachers, and scientists. Obviously them going to adulthood with depression, with inability to get the proper education will impact the entire life.
Or jobs. I mean,
exactly.
You mentioned your post, you can't volunteer anywhere, and you've been struggling to find sort of part-time jobs and internships. Is that right?
Yes. Long story short, I was working for part-time, obviously Saturday, Sunday, for retail industry, Zara. I think everyone shops in Zara.
I do.
So they decided not to extend my contract, and then one of the reasons was because of the pandemic. I mean, not to mention they still earn millions of money because of the pandemic. They decided not to extend my contract. Therefore, I am now left in the middle of the lockdown trying to get another job when everything is closed. Like, I've been working hospitality throughout my entire studies. So if this hospitality is closed, I am here struggling to find a job, and and also
so this company who had clearly plenty of money did not extend your contracts because they just because.
Well, just because, well, that was the first reason. And then I did obviously a lot of students, I decided to questioning it. I was like, how is that possible that pandemic really affected me having my contract extended? Well, then I got another response a month after, and there was the response that, oh, it wasn't really that. I think we informed your manager wrongly. So what we wanted to say is that your personality doesn't fit in the company. That's what we're trying to say. So, it's a different story than what I posted on LinkedIn, but, the entire thing shifted across to now I am the problem, not the pandemic. Whereas I've been informed first that the pandemic was the actual cause of my contract not being extended, but now it's my personality. Well, I wonder how is my personality affecting the entire company, but
I mean, from the conversation I'm having with you, I think your personality is more of an asset than a drawback.
Thank you.
A lot of people are waiting for perhaps, I don't want to say a leader, but for someone to say, and which is what you've done, I've had enough, we are all struggling. Because some people won't have had the force and the courage and the bravery just to put themselves out there like you have. So I think it's a brilliant first step.
The question is, what are we doing next?
What are we doing next? What should we do next?
Wow. I would say
an uprising.
Break the system. Uprise.
That's always the fight. That's anarchy is always a good bet.
Yeah. Well, let's try. Perhaps we can make a difference for all the students out there.
Yeah.
And speak up.
Well, thank you, Sylvester.
You're really welcome.
Thank you very much for that piece, Sam. And if you have experienced any mental health issues throughout this pandemic, then you can get in contact with the charity Mind via their website, www.mind.org.uk, or phone them on weekdays 9 to 6 on 0300 123 3393. If you are experiencing a mental health emergency, you can contact the NHS Mental Health Emergency Helpline through their website, where they will give you an emergency number. So that brings us to the end of this week's episode. We thank you so much for joining us once again and for being so patient as we've gone through the technical difficulties. Don't forget that you can join us every Thursday, and we promise we'll be more on time in future, but normally we'll be on from 5 to 6 p.m. via this YouTube live stream, same place, same time, and that's Greenwich Mean Time. You can also find our social media at LSR Politics, both on Twitter and Instagram, and don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel so you can stay up to date with all the shows, not just from the UK team, but from the other teams on Liverpool Politics Hour as well.